it's a difficult issue. I'm so pleased that this institution has this, downstairs has this wonderful exhibit on Jefferson and slavery. It's not quite as bad as Jefferson's situation, but it's difficult. It's hard to understand when we look back how these people who could believe what they did, how Jefferson could write, all men are created equal, how Washington could do what he did and still own slaves. And the only way I can reconcile it is Washington was a man of his times. He had grown up with slavery. His parents had slavery. All of his peers in Virginia had slaves. There was slavery everywhere in the world. There was slavery in European countries. There was slavery in Africa. There was slavery in China. As he grew up, there was slavery in all the colonies. There was slavery in South America. There was slavery everywhere. Now, to their credit, some of the people, and it's really the first time that it really happens, some of the people in the Revolutionary period in the Americas begin turning against slavery. But when you think about it, every single person who signed the Declaration of Independence except John Adams owned slaves. Didn't matter what state they were from. Had owned slaves at one time. Let me be precise on that. Some people moved beyond it. Ben Franklin, to his endless credit, at his incredibly elderly age, becomes the head of the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society. Now that's a man who sees the future, and Ben Franklin is amazing. But during the Revolutionary War, some of Washington's aides, in particular Lafayette and Henry Laurens, and to a lesser extent Alexander Hamilton, start speaking to him on this slavery issue. How can you own slaves? You would send a great model by ending your own slaveholding. And Washington debates that. It's clear. He debates it. He begins saying slavery is not a good institution. It doesn't really work well. But he is so committed to the Union, and he knows that this Union won't hold together because the South is economically committed to slavery. And he has owned plantation in his own works. And then when he starts doing that navigation project, he buys more slaves for the navigation project. The company used slaves to build it because they couldn't get free men to do this miserable job of building the...
And dangerous, too.
Dangerous, oh yeah, because they were blowing up the river, and people would be blown up at the same time. It was difficult work because the explosives weren't quite so good back then. And so he was actually relying more on slaves, and yet he wanted. And so how he deals with that, it's interesting. On his deathbed, he had written 2 wills, and we don't know what one said. But on his deathbed, he says, this is the will. He tears up the one, and this is the will. And that will provides for the freeing his slaves. Now, Washington was always more an actor than a speaker. And I have to believe that he was trying to send a message with that final act toward calling on people to free their slaves. But he obviously continued to have his slaves, and we have to say he was a product of his time. I can't excuse him because we do see people like Benjamin Franklin making the change. But of course, for Ben Franklin, there wasn't a financial incentive. He didn't need slaves in his printing work. Right. Washington, it's the only way his plantation could operate. And so despite the urgings of people like Lafayette, he doesn't free his slaves until his deathbed.